Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Actually Useful, the show where we diagnose what's wrong with the internet and we talk with the good folks who are trying to fix it. We have a very exciting guest today. Keyana Sapp is with us from Worse on Purpose, which many listeners sent us before we talked to Keyana. But before we get into that, we have a little shameless self-promotion and then some news. So we finally launched our Substack. We've talked about it the whole time we've been doing this show, but we did finally launch it. It will have some content from our interviews that we do. It'll have some additional content, some written content that we work on, since Josh and I send each other thoughts on enshittification all day, every day. We'll do some news bits, and we will have some fun bonus episode content for subscribers. Our content is free. There is a paid version, which is the best way to support the show. What else, Josh? What else should we say about our Substack?
And you're just going to get a lot of like really intelligent, hot rants from a couple of cute queer Quakers. So what could be better?
Everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. Yeah. Also funny, I think our moms were our first subscribers. So that's cute.
Absolutely. Moms are your day one. Okay?
Moms live. And they're so informed about enshittification now. My mom is like her friend's tech guru at this point, I think.
I know, dude. We're giving the people the education they need.
Exactly. Exactly. This is what they need. All right, Josh, will you have some bummer news for us? Let us hear it.
Yes. You got to do the fun bit about Substack. So I'll bring us back down to earth. This one caught my eye. So Spirit Airlines went out of business, and their assets are being auctioned off. And something that I didn't really ever think about as like an asset was all their emails and like Teams communications. But it looks like Google bought all their 100 million emails and 500 million Teams chats for $10 million. You might be thinking like, why would anyone want that? Well, when you think about AI models and what they're being trained on, right? At first, when they're just coming out, they're trained on like high quality human information. So that's like books. And then, at first they're gating it to like Reddit comments that have at least 3 upvotes. So there's like some amount of vetting. Then eventually they need more and more data. And so they start using like other Reddit comments, Wikipedia, then eventually like 4chan, then eventually they're training on like porn. And so they're just like ripping through all content on the internet. And aside from books, kind of the last bastion of pre-AI written communication is privately held communication, like internal comms. And so from like a Machiavellian, like evil perspective, this is pretty smart.
It's so smart. It's so smart. It's so bad.
We were chatting before the show and we were like, this is a very smart solution to a very evil question, which is like, how do we keep refining these bots that are going to destroy the world? But, essentially they just have really high quality communication between people because it's real. And then the other aspect of it is that this is all like in a actual business environment. So these are communications about like solving real problems. Like you have a plane that has not enough fuel and it needs to get resupplied. You have a plane with a massive delay. You have inclement weather. You have cancellations. You've overbooked flights. Like these are employees communicating with each other about solving real problems. And so I think some of the calculus is like, if we train our LLMs on this data set, it'll get better at actually solving human problems.
Especially because I feel like we're already in the situation where AI is inadvertently getting trained on AI generated content. Like we're already in the Ouroboros snake eating its tail. And so like it is so smart for them to go all the way back to the 80s to be like, how did people solve problems before we had the internet messing things up?
Yeah, this is the last 40 years of communication. So this goes all the way back to 1986. And it's funny. I feel like the snake eating its own tail, like what happens when so much of the internet is AI, that AI starts getting worse because it's trained on itself. Like, I feel like that was an idea that people thought would maybe be like 10 to 20 years in the future.
Yeah.
and it was like 6 months later, it's a huge problem. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. More to watch in this space.
On the topic of things getting worse, however,
Amazing
welcome.
transition.
Thank you, thank you. Sometimes we're really good at these
Yeah,
transitions.
yeah, that was good.
Keyana, we are so happy to have you here with us today. So you created Worse on Purpose, which I'll let you speak about, but it is deeply enshittification. It is about enshittification. Fantastic name for it. I love all of the different ways we've like described enshittification. But tell us a little bit about Worse on Purpose, what the goals are, sort of how you do the scoring criteria with the brand ledger. Let us know a little bit about your project.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for having me on the show. Very excited to be here. So yeah, as you said, Worse on Purpose. First of all, it's a investigative newsletter. So every week I cover a different industry, basically map the state of consolidation in that industry, the history of consolidation in that industry, and talk a little bit about how products have essentially gotten worse, reduced in quality over that period. And so I do that every week for a different industry based on what my readers request that I talk about next. So I've covered everything from appliances to backpacks. Next week, I'm covering supplements. And I'm really focused on consumer goods, essentially, physical consumer goods. So I know you guys have more of a technology bent. I think, interestingly, a lot of the themes around enshittification are kind of the same, although there are some differences. And so, yeah, really excited to get into that with you today. As well as the newsletter, I also maintain what is essentially a public database I call the brand ledger. And essentially, the brand ledger for every category that I cover, all of the brands that I cover in each one of those investigations then goes onto the ledger. And the whole point of the ledger is to give consumers a very easy to access, easy to understand way to check the brands that they're shopping for, and specifically to check the ownership structure of the brands that they're shopping. And so on the ledger, each brand that I cover will get a rating. It's either approved, watch list, former great, or avoid. And essentially, each one of those categories is a verdict I make on each one of those brands based on a few criteria. Of course, like the inputs to that criteria are things like ownership history, manufacturing continuity. So, are they still actually making their own things themselves, or are they using contract manufacturers? If they use contract manufacturers, are these long-term relationships they have, like a company like Apple? You know, it'd be very difficult to say that their physical goods are bad because they use contract manufacturers, but they've had those relationships for a long time, and so they still have some level of control over the manufacturing. Then we look at things like the repairability of the construction, how good their warranty is, things like that. And then based on all of those criteria, I make a decision and put them into one of those four categories. Approved means, quality, ownership, stewardship, all of those things really check out for this company. And, they would be one that I would buy from and recommend people buy from as well. Watch list means there's documented risk factors. That means that maybe the company was bought recently. We haven't had enough data about the effects that ownership change has had on the product, but they go on the watch list because it's not founder led anymore. The people who created the company aren't running it anymore, so they go onto the watch list. Beyond that, we have former greats. So this is a special category for brands that were at once considered like really exceptional. Once they move through different owners, they move into that former great category. And then avoid is brands basically actively being extracted, all the brands that are part of those licensing models, things like that.
I think that's something that like people aren't aware of, or there isn't a service that's like doing that. And so I think it's really valuable to help your audience like sort through a lot of this stuff, because it's all, spoiler alert, the same like three private equity firms that kind of own everything now.
It does seem that way, yeah.
Was there a brand that like inspired this? Like, were you so frustrated with the enshittification of a product that you were like, I'm going to start this project?
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. I mean, people don't really understand the connection between ownership or consolidation and product quality. And I was one of those people until about 6 months ago. And so I was in the market for a new backpack. I had this old JanSport bag. Basically from my high school days. So over 10 years at that point, it was like practically falling apart. So I needed just a new everyday bag. So I went to a store in Denver and was comparing some options on the shelf, basic like $50 book bags, essentially. And I saw the old JanSport bag that I had in high school and picked it up and could immediately tell like something was up here. Like this isn't the product that, I bought, all those years ago. And so I remember thinking to myself in the store, like, I'm going to check out what went on with JanSport because like this is not the same product. So I Googled it and learned a little bit about VF Corp. They're a Denver-based company as well, actually. They basically throughout the 90s and the early 2000s bought up every high school backpack brand that you could think of, Eastpak, North Face, a bunch of others as well. So I remember thinking to myself, like, as I was standing in that store comparing all those options, I was literally looking at five options on a shelf, and they all came from the same parent company. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, I had no idea that this was even a possibility, that this sort of like fake competition exists. And so I typed up a Reddit post and put it on r/buy it for life, and it went like totally viral. Like I was totally blown away. Like had people really didn't know that that mechanism kind of existed. And so I started looking into some other industries. The next one I looked into was glasses, and the story there is like even crazier, right? There's a company called Excelsior Luxottica. They own like a bunch of the major frame manufacturers, so like Ray-Ban, Oakley, like a ton of them. And then not only that, but they also own the major retail outlets, so like I Buy Direct, Sunglass Hut, all of those. And the crazy thing about them is that they also own America's largest vision insurance company as well. So like 60% of American vision insurance is done through that company. That insurer then funnels customers into those retail outlets for particular discounts. And of course, those retail outlets only sell Luxottica's products. So it's this totally like circular thing, one company owning all of it. So typed that up and again went totally viral. So after a couple of those experiences on Reddit, I was like, well, I should, put this stuff into a more research oriented format. So started publishing the newsletter, and the feedback has just been absolutely astronomical. So we've definitely landed on something, a feeling that everyone sort of has innately, that the stuff they buy just ain't what it used to be. But I think nobody has really spoken about it from a consumer angle. And the crazy thing about all of this is there's so much reporting on the consolidation that happens. Like, of course, Wall Street really cares. Like, if you're investing in these large conglomerates, or if you're a private investor in a PE company, you really care like what the strategies they're implementing are. And so they're very public about these sorts of things. Like you can see, the CEOs of these large companies will say when they decide to offshore manufacturing, and it's always after, some kind of ownership change. So basically, all I do in my articles is sift through all of those financial statements, annual reports, quarterly updates, all those kinds of things, map, where the strategies shifted, and then inform consumers. And then a big part of what I try to do is share what the alternatives are, because there are a ton in the market. Like there are a lot of great companies building great products, doing great things, and yeah, a big part of what I want to do is promote them as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we had the same sort of revelation, which is that like I do think people have been talking about day-to-day impacts of like most people just call it like late stage capitalism, where they're just feeling like they have less choice, things are more expensive, they're lower quality. And you'll see people talk about like there's a crash out on HP printers online like once a week,
Yeah,
right? Which is
yeah,
totally
yeah,
justified. But I think what's really interesting is like what we had noticed when we started this show is what I think you've noticed as well, which is that there's so much content about it at a high level. Like there's so much information about the macro levels of like what's causing this, for better or worse. Like you said, they're open about their ownership changes. And there's a lot of reporters and journalists and authors who've been trying to sort of unpack this system. But then as a consumer, as a technologist, as like a regular person, you look at it and you're like, okay, well, what else am I supposed to do? I
right, exactly.
can't put this onus on researching every single thing. Unreasonable. Like it's unreasonable to expect that we have to go through all these hoops just to try to find a good product or an app that won't fuck us over or whatever. And so I love that you had the same approach that I think we did, which is like there has to be a better way. And honestly, I feel like Josh and I have talked about this. Like, we struggle. Tech is really bad. We have episodes that are both unpacking the bad things and trying to shed light on the good things. And like, we struggle to find good episodes. Like, we struggle to find
Yeah.
companies we want to promote and people who are like offering these alternatives. So we are so glad so many people sent us your work so that we can be like, hey, here's a whole bunch of options for like, stop buying the shit brands and go buy the
Yeah.
brands that have research that they're still good. I'm curious, your own background, you were at Palantir, you founded a couple of things. So you have some like relationship to institutional capital that I think is
Oh, big time. Yeah.
really interesting coming from, just the types of rooms you've been in. What would you say, like your relationship to that? How has that informed your perspective on this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's raised VC money for a technology venture or any venture really understands how incentives shift after you do that. You know, it goes from what could possibly be a long-term, lifelong venture to a venture that needs a return at some point for it to make sense. And I think a sad part about technology is that I think a lot of founders see raising VC money as the only sort of path to getting a great product built. And so there's so many cases of founders where they do that and spend 5 years building a product that by the end of it, they're not very proud of. And that's like hyper pervasive in tech. But I think actually it's less pervasive in other industries. Like people bootstrap other businesses all the time, and it's easier to like start a business, with principles outside of technology because the nature of scale in technology is really important. It's easy to spin up a competitor, and so you need to get to scale way quicker than you would in any other industry, which is why you need the rocket fuel of VC. And it creates like this environment where it's very hard to just build a sustainable long-term technology company. Like there's too much upside in many cases for founders to make that decision. Like when it starts working, they just want to pour fuel on it, and quite understandably because it's so competitive in that way. And so, yeah, I think the mechanisms are uh, especially powerful in technology, though they still exist everywhere else. So that was one thing I learned in technology on the startup side was it's very hard to build what you want to build once you raise money. Like you just have to make it something either really big or really profitable really quickly. And so that just affects your decision making as a founder and a steward of that product. So that was one element. The other element I learned was, working more on the enterprise side, solving problems for larger organizations. And the thing I learned there was, basically the only focus was on efficiency. So either cutting costs or increasing profits. So the kinds of things that I was working on was, procurement optimization. How can we buy stuff cheaper? How can we distribute it cheaper? Or shop floor optimization. Like how can we make sure the machines on a factory plant are down less? So can we do predictive maintenance instead of like scrambling every time it turns on? And so on both sides, like it's always an efficiency thing. What I never worked on was like, how do we make the product better? How do we make our customers have a better experience interacting with us as a company? Like that was never anything I worked on. And I think that's the nature of what you might call like the measurement paradigm that we have nowadays. Like because we're able to measure every aspect of our business, return on ad spend, MMR, like all this stuff, like those are the metrics that we are trying to affect at all times. Like quarterly reviews, it's always looking at those top line figures. What we very rarely look at is, how have long-term customer reviews of the product that we've been working on going? How are the customer interactions going, actually? We're so disconnected from those things that we stop caring about like what you might call the intangible features of the product that actually made it great in the first place. And that's like a slow slide. Like no one decided that. It's just the nature of a company growing, founders retiring out, the people who cared about that just no longer being in place. And so all it becomes is, a financial instrument at that point. And it gets treated in that way because that's the only rational way to treat it. And so they become totally profit maximizing and totally short-term minded. And that's sadly just how it slides. And so my only hope is by shedding light on that mechanism, people will just make more informed decisions when they buy stuff. They're just look into ownership hierarchy, and then if they do that, then there won't be any money to be made from extracting from brands in this way. And hopefully the financiers, the PE folks that you mentioned, hopefully the strategy just won't be profitable at that point, and they'll stop doing it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty big question, but just like capitalism 101, right? Like you can understand why people want better returns, like better exit packages, like all these things, but at a certain point one would think you would hit like a limit where you can no longer squeeze the consumer, like your product quality has gone down so much that you have to increase the quality. Like I guess, do you see like a cliff we're heading off? Like, how do you think about the future? Because all these things you're talking about, a lot of the things we talk about on this show are like such short term strategies.
Well, I mean, they are short term. So, the private equity play or the brand licensing play, it's always a distressed brand that they're picking up in the first place. Like,
Totally.
yes, with a lot of brand value, but it's been run into the ground. So they're picking it up on pennies on the dollar. And then the play is, we're going to basically ride on the accumulated brand value. That's what they're buying, not, the shirt designs or anything like that. What they're buying is the accumulated brand value. Let's manufacture products with that brand name on it as cheaply as possible and distribute it to a global market. They know that that's a short-term strategy. They know, after someone buys a couple t-shirts from the new Supreme and, the label comes off in the wash, they're not going to buy another one. But the point is they were able to make a short-term return on that distressed asset by running this play. And they frankly don't care that it's not going to last more than 5 years once consumers cotton on. Like by then they've extracted the value, the profits, it's 10x what they paid on the original distressed asset, and they're on to the next one. So that is brand licensing in a nutshell. That is the play. It's short term by its very nature. Um, but that's not to say all investments are like that. Some invest like large conglomerates, they buy and hold for a long period of time. They see genuine synergies. That's why they pick up these companies. So really, like each investment is different. It is the case that in every one of these enshittification stories, it seems like private equity has been the cause. But I would equally say, like, there are examples, in the power tools industry, Milwaukee was a very niche company, was picked up by TTI in like 2005 or something, and they invested a ton of money in R&D, like really built up the brand. They expanded all the manufacturing, like ton more jobs. And Milwaukee is like the prosumer darling right now. They're not an independent company. They got bought in 2005, but that was a financier that was in for the long term. They wanted to build an enduring product. And they made it work. And I think if you ask the average Milwaukee employee pre 2005 post, they would say life is better after 2005. I'm glad they invested in the company. So I do want to say that, like, there are like cases of investments, external capital causing, great results, building out a lot of jobs in certain areas. Like that does happen. The problem is like all the extractive people come from that space as well. And so all the bullshit we see in the market is caused by them too. But I definitely don't want to paint everyone,
Yeah.
every Wall Street guy with a broad brush like that.
So we just did recently, we did like a 2 episode deep dive on private equity that
Mhm.
Josh and I spent months researching. I feel actually like I quite understand it after this. It's
Good, because
financial
I still
engineering.
don't.
Okay, well, I think I do. But like the product is financial engineering. And so it is opaque by intention, right? Like it's intended to be quite complex and meant for financiers to understand, which I am not. But it's interesting, like, let's take out the edge cases like Milwaukee. Like, we know, like you just said, we know that, like, a lot of the time, the process is you have a distressed business, private equity comes in, they pitch that they're going to flip it. They don't really flip it. They just extract whatever's left to put into the pockets of certain people who benefit from this transaction at the expense often of the employees, pension, severance, protection, job quality, whatever. I'm curious, like, I just kind of want your take on this. Like, you have a distressed business. Like, think about like Toys R Us. Like, you have people who were in charge of Toys R Us. They knew that they were doing badly. They'd made a couple bad business decisions after years of like devoted brand love, devoted employees. At some point, somebody decides, yeah, we're going to sign the contract with private equity. Like, we're going to send this over. And maybe in Toys R Us's day, we didn't know, but certainly in 2026, everybody knows, like, if you're signing to private equity, you just killed the company, basically. You destined it to a slow death. Is it that the people on the business side who are like signing this contract, is it just that they're always money people who don't have a relationship to the workers or the product and like don't feel an emotional tie? Like, what is driving that decision, knowing that it's dooming a lot of people? Is it simply just personal greed that, like, 10 to 30 people will become financially enriched by this decision? What's your take on like why they do it? Especially because it's so dirty that they like continue to say, we're going to flip the asset and make it better. I've worked for companies acquired by private equity, and like they absolutely try to tell you like, it's going to be better now. We're going to save the company. And it's like, everybody knows this is a lie.
And how do they keep getting investments if people know like only like 8 people really benefit?
Yeah, to answer your question, I do want to be really careful because the motivation that someone who spent a lifetime building a business has to sell can be very complex and wide ranging. And in many cases, those private equity deals are being done with financiers from a previous deal in the first place. So, when that's the case, like again, we're moving into that territory where it's pure self-interest and profit maximization. Like we're not connected to the customer or the product anymore. And so, like often it happens several times. And so, when it's
Yeah.
a financier buying from a financier, it's like a purely profit maximizing thing. I think the more interesting question is why, after spending you know 40 years building your HVAC services company or building your cookware brand or whatever it might be, why would you sell to these guys at the end of it? And really, like, I want to be extremely gracious to those folks because, in many cases, they don't have, a young person who they trust who really wants to take on the business that they could hand over the reins to and figure out some kind of, profit sharing deal and have a continuation of the sort of standards that were in place. Like in many cases, people, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I think we're roughly the same generation. People of our generation, they're just not interested in doing that. And so they have a couple other options. Maybe they can find another operator to come in and, they can come up with that deal, but that's not easy. Like many people spend many years at the end of their careers trying to get that deal happening, and then it doesn't happen. And then, they're getting to 70, they need to retire and enjoy their life. They need to, maybe their spouse is now not doing well and they need cash for their healthcare. And so after a lot of consternation and a lot of regret, they choose to take that deal because it will let them just not worry about the rest of their life. And they deserve that. They've built something that was incredible. They deserve not to worry about the rest of their life at 70, having done all that work. And so I think that is the situation that happens repeatedly in the market. And the last thing I would want to do is blame that person for that decision, given all the hard work they put in. And you're absolutely right. The private equity folks would be saying, we'll be great stewards of this business. All of your customers, they're not going to notice a difference. And I want to say some private equity companies, they are doing a good
Yeah,
job
there
at
are a
that.
couple, yeah.
They are operating these businesses and they are running them well, but many of them are not. The thing I just wanted to highlight is like, I don't blame the person who decides to make that decision. Some of them are greedy. Some of them probably
Yeah.
don't even look for another operator to run the business. They just want to get the cash out, like I'm sure. But definitely many of them, they feel like they're between a rock and a hard place and this their only option.
Like you said, like it is nuanced. Like there's different types of PE firms, there's different types of investors. Like all of these things
Yeah.
have their own backstory. I do think a lot of the time it's just money people talking to money people and nobody who cares about the
Yeah,
product is
100%.
involved. But
Yeah.
it is interesting sometimes when it's like if it is a family run company that has a legacy and has a brand and you have like 1,000 employees, I find it very difficult to believe you couldn't find any one of those 999 people to like do the job, right? And so I think they all have sort of a different backstory to them, but I think it's tough sometimes to see. I think a thing we're seeing now is like some beloved brands get sold to PE, they flounder, there's press about it, and then the original founder or the family comes out and is like, I'm disheartened to see this. And it's a little hard to feel sympathetic because it's like I believe that you still like you had some skin in the game to know to do the research for it.
The other thing I would say is like incentives slide slowly, like you take a little seed check, really nothing changes day to day. Like that seed investor doesn't care that much. And then you realize like, oh, we're going to need to raise a bit more money to get this new feature set out and we need to hire a couple people or whatever. Okay, so we'll raise a bit more. And then now the investors are asking for like a quarterly board meeting and we need a board seat and like all this stuff. And then you're like, okay, well, we need the money, so we might as well raise, like we'll see how that goes. And then by the Series A, now you've got five board members, each from different funds. Like you don't have as much voting control. Now they're actually asking, what the go-to-market strategy is and they're questioning your decision making as a CEO. And I think like that happens without at any one of those stages there being like a conscious decision to cede power.
Yeah.
It's just you wake up at the end of 10 years and you're like, fuck, I have no moves to make. I can't even run my own business anymore. And that's another reason why founders get out and take these shitty deals is
Yeah.
because they're like the incentives have got so screwed up, they're just done with it. And it's not what they got into it in the first place for.
And we're in a very risk averse market that doesn't like new ideas. And like there's a lot to be said for sort of the environment that we're in being something very different than, say, like the 2008, product market, right?
Totally. 100%.
I think it's interesting that you talk about like a lot of these things. The real value is the brand, like not the object itself. It's a very like postmodern
Yeah,
business
it is
perspective,
kind of,
that
yeah.
it's like it's not the research or the manufacturing advantage. I mean, we just saw like Allbirds rebrand as
I
Smartbird
know,
and
man. What
like
the hell?
pivot to AI, which
Yeah.
is just
Well,
like,
I think the really interesting thing about that is that it actually says a lot about us as consumers, how important the brand value is. Like, the example I give, like if you ask the average consumer in like 1960 or 70 that's buying a new car, like what are the things that you like really care about in this car? They would say like, well, I need it to run 150,000 miles. Like, I want it to, get me from point A to B without any trouble. And I want it to be easy to work on. If you ask the same question now, it's like, I want heated steering wheels and I want like a window at the back that rolls down so my dog can stick its head out the window. It's like all these things that have nothing to do with the actual like quality of the car. They have to do with like the style, the look, the how it makes you feel, how it represents you as a person, like all this stuff that isn't actually anything to do with the quality of the car. And I think, those criteria, those superficial criteria, like what we buy, like never before has it been easier to display the appearance of quality in our marketing, like over the top of, something that is just totally terrible and doesn't work at all. And I think brands get away with that because we've changed the criteria under which we buy. Like we want the next best thing, the in thing, whatever is in, rather than, whatever will last, whatever we'll use for a long time. So yeah, I think that point, it really does say a lot about us, that the value that these financiers place on brands. So
Yeah.
well, not to get all Marxist, but as we become estranged from our
yeah,
labor,
chicken or egg, I get it.
yeah,
What,
yeah,
yeah,
we
yeah,
start
yeah.
valuing,
Yeah,
it's
totally. No, that is a very interesting question. It's such a difficult question to answer. Like, okay, well, what caused it? Like, is this like the financiers putting this like guise of quality on products through the marketing has caused us to want that guise in the next in thing? And social media marketing obviously has a huge influence on this, how we consume media in general. But what came first, like are sentiments changing or these changing factors? Like such a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
But
I have a theory I've been touting to my friends. I'll air it now on the show. But in
I'm
this
so
idea
ready.
of like people buying brands, I think that right now we are living in an economy where every single thing is recyclable. Every domain name, every content that's been written,
mm,
any agent you've built, any workflow we've built this world where like everything that already exists can be turned into something else, and people at large, the economy, society would rather take the risk aversion, right? Would rather take something that already exists and has some background or context or appreciation or familiarity and turn it into something else. And here's my theory. I believe that because of that, we currently have people in power in a lot of these industries, in executive roles and investment roles, in strategic roles, who have less conviction as operators than people did 20 years ago. Because I think if you are in a recycling economy where everything is getting reused as something else, conviction actually becomes a liability. Because if you get stuck on like, no, Allbirds is a shoe company, not an AI company, you've now become difficult to work with. So like, I think there's a relationship. I've seen this in my day-to-day life as like an operator in tech companies. The people who are in charge are simply more malleable than they were 20 years ago. Like they are
mm,
more easily swayed by any new information because that's the type of people who succeed when what the economy is asking for is stuff that already has a footprint on it. You know what I mean? They're like,
yeah.
how can I turn this footprint into a handprint or whatever? And so I've been really thinking about that recently because I think it really says something about our tool system and how we view ourselves as consumers. It just becomes very surreal to be like, yeah, a shoe company can't be an AI company, guys. Like we just don't make a different company.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be that way.
No, totally. That's a really interesting thought. I hadn't really thought of it like the recycle economy. Like we've lost our ability to dare, like, and vision has just gone out the window with that. And I wonder what caused that. Like, is that the internet? Is that like us just being dumbed down by what we consume? Like, what
I
do you
think
think?
I think there's a at large, I think there's a really big disconnect between the people who are financing culture and products and the people who are using them. And like an example is like IP, right? We complain. I'm big into, but Josh and I are both big book people. book people know lots of movie people, and like there's no new movie IP. Like everything is
Yeah,
recycled
literally, like
IP, and
it's
nobody
just a
wants that.
superhero.
Everybody's like,
Yeah.
fund an original film, please. And I think like a good example that we talk about in book world is like I was like an early adopter of heated rivalry when the book first came out, right? This is my culture. I'm one of these girlies. And we were so excited when Jacob Tierney's adaptation came out. It feels so true to form, and there's been so many bad adaptations of beloved romance novels that get turned into like just series that are like flat, misogynist. They don't understand the depth and the like euphoria of like what a romantic story is supposed to make an audience feel. And Heated Revelry, the show, was so good. But the takeaway that Big Daddy Publishing has had is that what the people want is more hockey romances. That is not the takeaway from Heated Rivalry. That's not what the people wanted. We don't give a shit about hockey, okay?
Yeah,
So like now there's all this green light for hockey like
that's
romance
so
shows,
funny.
hockey romance movies, and it's like nobody wants this. Like nobody's asking for this, and I feel like we keep experiencing that as consumers, where it's just like we like so many of our like clips from our show is just being like the things that people are building is not what anyone wants to use. And so there's a real disconnect of just like the people who are financing what we use on a day-to-day basis for entertainment, for value, for efficiency, for convenience. They're so disconnected at this point from what consumers want. And I think part of it is like there's too many steps in between. Like there's too many
Yeah,
people
there's too many
involved.
middlemen.
It
Yeah.
gets too diluted. Like there's just no way to do it. But
Well, does that make you optimistic? Like, given how much easier it is nowadays to make a movie, you could just be like four friends and really have an idea and try really hard for 6 months with just basic cameras and like make something happen. Like, does that give you optimism about art in the future? Like, maybe we,
This is my answer to this question, which I don't know, Ariel, if you're gonna love this, but I think we have too much data. Like, I
right.
think we have too much information. And like, if I'm just trying to think about this abstractly, like before you had so much user data, the only way to increase the value of your product is to like make a better product, right?
yeah,
Or you can
that's very
advertise
interesting. Yeah.
better, or you can like, hire more
More salespeople or whatever.
consultants and,
Yeah.
invest in strategy. But like the ability to micro target, like, and enshittify to the level of granularity, to be like, this guy will watch this ad for half a second longer if it has this color in the background at this time of day. Like, I think it becomes so much easier to do all this financialization with that much data. And it's like, oh, why would we do the hard thing of like trying to make a better product when we can like literally see through our models that we can shave off 2 cents on the type of screw we use,
Right.
and no one will stop buying it. It'll last 2 months less. It's like you can get so specific on these things because we have this information now. Like, I think the competitive advantage that artists are going to have as everything becomes like slopified is taste.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because sure, you can just start churning out like the Mandalorian and Grogu to like, squeeze some nostalgia out of the
Yeah.
like first Mandalorian series. But like eventually you're going to need artists who like have something to say and do something like jagged and uncomfortable and not audience tested, because otherwise everything's just going to feel like smooth and samey.
Yeah.
We're so far afield.
No, I feel like this is good because it's all one thing. I think the people are hungry for stuff that is different and low budget and is human. However, it's the same problem that we have with physical goods getting bought by private equity, with tech companies, where it's like there is still a scale problem on art as well, of like you can't, like, we make this podcast and we talk shit about all the platforms that we would like to do well on. Like, we basically are just shooting ourselves in the foot and trying to figure out like how do we scale from here. And I think a lot of homemade art has that problem, right? And homemade
Yeah.
companies, like, we're going to end this show with a listener idea, and we end every show that way. And initially when we started, the segment was like, how do we make this more fundable? And like, I don't know that we're any closer to an understanding of how to fund good ideas than we were a year ago. Like, this is still a problem of just, it feels like in order to succeed in such a messy, noisy, crap market on all products, you have to have more money than most people with good ideas. In order to get more money, you have to get backing. And as we've said, backing is when you start to lose the incentives. And actually, this brings me back to a question I do want to ask you. about misaligned incentives. Like, in your experience, looking at the patterns of how ownership consolidation changes the product quality, is there a clear like domino to fall where you can see that it's starting to go down the path of misaligned incentives? Is there any like one
Oh,
pattern that really sticks out?
it's always an ownership change. So like the first one is always at the moment the founder owner cedes the first bit of control of ownership. So whether that's a seed round or bringing on a third party investor after you've developed the product a bit more, like, or it could be like you were vertically integrated and you decided to use a contract manufacturer. That is also ceding control. Like, you're not giving up equity, but you're giving up control over the ultimate IP, right? The manufacturing process. That's a really important part of the IP of a consumer products company. And so that's what I would categorize as the first domino. It's always some degree of, rather than ownership, I would say giving up control.
Do you feel any sense of like, I don't know, tension with how you're thinking about like your own growth? Like, this is something Ariel and I talk about, is like, how do we want to monetize? Like, how do we want to do advertisements? Like, how can you prevent enshittification?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've taken quite a, I think, radical sort of stance that I published in a piece called On Independence, where I spoke about the media landscape and what I see as like the biggest problems with the way we get information about consumer goods online. It's practically impossible to find any, opinion about a product online that's not connected to some kind of ulterior incentive, whether that's a sponsorship, like most flagrantly, or, even an affiliate link, like most subtly. If you're promoting a product through an affiliate link, even if you've done a bunch of testing, like, there is a incentive issue there. And the affiliate link is why we have like all these bullshit listicles of 10 items that you need to buy in every category. It's like, that's why it's so hard to find information online. So in that piece, I made, I guess, what you could call a pledge, but pledged that essentially that Worse on Purpose would be entirely reader funded, never going to accept money from a brand for a sponsorship or a advertisement, or I'll never use an affiliate link. And so any product that I recommend, I'm not going to benefit from in any way. And so the way that readers support that kind of investigation is through a membership or through donations. So yeah, you can become a member at Worse on Purpose for $7 a month or 70 a year. Or you can donate if the work's useful. And honestly, I've been totally blown away by how effective that's been as a business model. It just shows me that people really want this kind of information that's not co-opted by all kinds of different incentives, and they're willing to pay for access to that. And so, yeah, I would really recommend exploring that as a potential option.
One of the things in your On Independence article that you wrote that I thought was quite shocking and impressive in its bold stance is that you also said that you have no plans to hire anyone because you think hiring someone also creates a struggle for incentives because now you're responsible for paying somebody else. And so you have to have a different income stream. I'm very curious then, like going back to our conversation about so much of enshittification comes from the endless pursuit of growth at all costs. And like I quote this often, it's from Jason Hickel's book, Less is More. The only thing in nature that grows forever is cancer. Like that's the only thing that should ever be growing forever without stopping. And so I'm curious, like, do you see a natural like ceiling for Worse on Purpose where you're like, this is when we reach our final value proposition and we can continue doing this and no more? Or like, is there a growth runway that doesn't stop for it? I guess, how are you thinking about that?
I mean, my goal with Worse on Purpose is simply to provide the most accurate, readable, and up-to-date information about ownership structures in consumer goods across industries. And I think, with all the tools available to us, that is a very manageable project for one person to have. That's not to say like I won't use contractors at one point. Like, one thing I think would be really valuable, a lot of readers have asked for it, is at least like an audio version or a video version of the articles I put out. And so that would be an example. Like, I'm not going to edit every video myself. Like, I just don't have time to do that. I would definitely work with a contractor in that example. And I wouldn't, it would be less of a form of leverage in that way, because a contractor, like, if for whatever reason, I'm not able to support myself, then maybe I can not put out a video for a month or so, and not pay that guy, and they'll be all right. They have a bunch of other,
Yeah.
work, hopefully. So it's not to say that I won't work with other people at all. I think contractors are totally fine, but yeah, an employee is just another form of leverage. Like, yeah, you can get a lot more done, but the problem is at some point, maybe for whatever reason, we lose a bunch of members. Maybe someone in my family is ill, so I need to draw more from the business or whatever it might be. Um, and so that would make it more likely at some point, if that were the case, for me to think to myself, well, it's so I can make payroll and pay this person, so I'll take the sponsorship this one time. And so just by having a rule that I'm never going to have anyone whose livelihood is dependent on the business except for me, then I don't have to make any of those decisions, because it's much easier for me to just say, okay, well, I won't get paid this month, but I can live with that. At least we've got a fully independent publication. So that's why, the kind of extreme rule. Do I think you can obviously build a sustainable business that doesn't succumb to incentives with employees? Like, yes, I definitely think you can. I don't think they're like this corrupting
Yeah,
force
yeah,
on every
yeah.
business. But that's just a decision I made for that reason.
No, I think that's it. I think it's interesting. I mean, like we said, we think a lot about employee-owned businesses, which is sort of a different take on the same type of problem, which is like, well, we all
Right,
have to have the
exactly.
same stake in it in order for it to succeed. Yeah.
No, I think there are lots of really interesting models like that. I think if this business was more complex and my goals, I mean, I would say they are quite lofty. Like, I do want to be the highest quality publication on these matters
Yeah.
on the internet. But they're not really lofty beyond that. Like, I don't, there would be obvious ways to expand the ledger, for example, do product reviews, like all that kind of stuff. But it would be impossible for me to do that on my own and still put out high quality investigations every week. And so I think a lot of it is just having this ability to say no, because I've been incredibly blessed. Like, so many opportunities have come out like through this writing. But you do have to build that muscle of saying, like, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, but I just need to focus on the next piece, and I'm going to pass for now. And I've been doing a lot of that. And it's just about like protecting the time, because if you don't do that, that's when it really feels like, oh, I need to get someone else to help out with this. And then the incentives really start shifting.
Before we move on to a very special segment, what can consumers do to push back against a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that I think we all underestimate the amount of power we have in voting with our dollars. And I think if we were a little more conscientious of what we bought and from whom, um, we would have a massive effect on the efficacy of these extractive strategies. And you'll always have a better experience buying from independents anyway. Even if things go wrong, you'll have a better experience. And so that's my only recommendation, just on, whenever you're looking for the next big purchase, do consider, the smaller companies, the up and comers. And I think you won't regret it.
Cool. Well, Kiana, where can people find you on the internet? Where would you like to send them?
Yeah, so best place to find me is worseonpurpose.com for all the investigations. If you want to check out the ledger, that's at ledger.worseonpurpose.com. And I'm on social media at Keyana Sapp, well, really only on Twitter for my personal. And if you're on Blue Sky, you can follow Worse on Purpose at Worse on Purpose.
All right, awesome. Well, should we go Falcon mode?
I think we should.
Kiana, we are going to need your best Falcon sound.
Okay, you got it. Oh!
Perfect. Amazing.
Amazing. Amazing.
I love the hands. I love it. We went full force.
It's the
Falcons
best
do
one.
that, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's the best when guests just go for it. So Falcon Mode is our listener submitted segment where we take an idea about a tech product or an app and we give our listeners advice on how to make it more usable, feasible, or fundable. So today we have a Falcon Mode from listener Lithia who says, "Hi, actually useful crew. I play a lot of mobile games in my spare time. I'm very willing to pay upfront for a good game or pay an additional fee to remove ads, but I absolutely refuse to spend my free time watching ads every 2 minutes or having to buy my way through a game. She should try using Grindr. My biggest source of annoyance is when I think I found a game like this, and then they change it up on me after I've been playing for a while. This just happened on my favorite Mahjong game app, and it literally ruined my whole week. I already paid to remove ads, but now all of a sudden, every level is quite literally impossible to win unless you use the power-ups they provide, which of course require watching an ad. In my humble opinion, it should be legally required to flag these practices in the App Store so that consumers can be aware of what they're getting into. barring this, how do I get someone to build a game library where I can find recommendations for games that meet my criteria? I'm not sure what would be in it for the game library themselves, but a crowdsourced solution for this would be amazing. I'm just not sure how you get funding to build and maintain something like this. What do y'all think?
Okay, Lithia, I have a lot of thoughts that are not all going to fit in this Falcon Mode segment. First, you have 3 people here who are currently trying to build products like this, where there are libraries of which things you should use and not use. Josh and I have talked about mobile games since before we launched the show. I would love to do a mobile game episode, and I did start going down a rabbit hole of answering this question. To my knowledge, there is not an existing library. However, there are a number of indie mobile game companies that specifically are trying to make their value proposition be that they have transparent monetization mechanics, or that they literally are no ads, no paywall, you pay once or you sign up. So I'm going to put a pin in this, basically. We're going to do a whole episode devoted to this. We have reached out to a few game developers that caught our eye. I don't feel like Josh and I are qualified ourselves to answer this, but I do empathize with this. I like to play merge games, which are some of the dumbest games that exist on the internet. It is functionally organizing recreationally while I watch TV, basically. And I was in this garden game, and I got to level 2000. And all of a sudden, I have to get 100 times more birds to harvest my garden than I had before. And I think, in all honesty, I think that this specific challenge of getting very far into a game to where you can't succeed on the levels unless you have power-ups that require usually for you to pay for them, I think, honestly, that is because people who get to level 200, who've put in 200 plus hours of playing a mobile game, are in such a specific and unusual segment. And what's really unfortunate is that segment of users, by definition, is already the most valuable. So you would think that you would age out. You've paid enough money. You've watched enough ads at some point that it seems like it should be the reverse. At one point, past 200 hours, it just becomes free to keep using it. Because now you're clearly a net promoter of this app, right? And so it's really dangerous for them to punish their most valuable and committed users. But I do think it's a very relevant problem. I think mobile games is so interesting because it's, in terms of consumer tech products, I don't think that there is a more diverse market in the sense of some of the worst things that exist on the internet are happening in mobile games. Just shitty development work, shitty monetization mechanics, that whole all the ads of I saw this thread that was if I were in a snowstorm and my children were starving, I would simply not reupholster the couch before fixing the hole in the ground, which is a very specific reference to a game that is advertised in every other mobile game. And it's so dumb. So it's such a shitty market. And also there are amazingly designed, gorgeous, beautiful, totally worth investing in mobile games where there is truly art happening, really fun mechanics. So we owe Lithia a full episode devoted to mobile games where we will find studios that are doing good consumer-friendly work in trying to just get us all a little relaxing click game to do while we're watching TV or going to bed.
And then we'll ask them their top 3 PE firms to sell out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, if you're listening and you have an idea that you think could be solved with tech, or you have a complaint that you'd like some thoughts on, please let us know. You can email us at heyactuallyuseful@gmail.com. You can hit us up on most socials at actuallyusefulpod. We love to hear from our listeners. Please check out our Substack.
And Keyana, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you so much. We've really enjoyed this.
Ariel, Josh, thank you guys. It was super fun. I had a blast. Thank you so much.
Actually Useful is part of the Industry Plant Podcast Network. It's co-hosted and created by Ariel Butters and co-hosted, produced, and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson. If you like the show, please consider subscribing to our Substack or YouTube, or give us a follow on most social media platforms at Actually Useful Pod.